not because, as I said, women are more peaceful, but because feminist ideas and acting strives towards more justice for all. And it is the research you mentioned before, that maybe I mentioned or maybe not. It is research, early research, for example, such as by the Brookings Institute or Professor Valerie Hudson and others, and that shows that equality within a country is the most significant factor towards whether a country is peaceful within its own borders or towards other countries. So had we more feminists, we wouldn't live in this world where we are living in. And reason being, I think, is because it's a lack of history and a lack of understanding what the feminist movement, like the most successful social movement, I believe, has achieved for all of us so far. When we talk about how feminism is like this ugly word and no one wants to call themselves in some parts of the world, like in Germany it's still problematic as well. And then I would usually say, well, I wouldn't want to live in a world where feminists hadn't fought for me. It would be a world where rape wouldn't be based on consent. It would be a world where we wouldn't vote and we weren't allowed to work when where we want, that we wouldn't allowed to leave the house. Like all achievements on political and economic rights have come from feminists. And it's this lack of this understanding that leads to too few people calling themselves feminists, I believe. The win-win situation. First of all, it is true. I mean, getting more, like distributing political power fairly among society does mean that those who currently are overrepresented in powerful positions, that they will lose. Like that's a fact. So there's no pinkwashing around that. I'm not going to tell anyone that some people are not going to lose political influence and power because they need to for a fairer world. But what the win-win in the end is, I mean, we're not going to solve any of the big problems. Like, we're not going to solve the climate catastrophe if we're not turning if we're not finding feminist solutions towards it. And by feminist, I mean climate justice solutions. We're not going to solve the problem that 8 people of the whole world own as much as the poorer half of the world. We're not going to solve any of the big problems if it wasn't for a focus on feminist approaches and a focus on the very basic human rights. So whilst short term, yes, certain parts of society will lose political influence and power, in the long term, it will make the whole world a fairer and safer and more healthy and better educated and anything place. On Hobbes, you're right, briefly outlined before, it is that feminists said, no, we don't believe what you, Hobbes, you are saying, that it's the normal state of the world is this violent one and where everyone only acts in self-interest. Because had that been the reason, there wouldn't be any human rights. You ask for, I guess, more practical, what that could mean or what that would mean. It means that there are certain governments out there, be it Sweden or Canada or Germany is doing it very often as well, when they travel abroad, when they go on state visits, they make a case or they make priority to meet activist feminist civil society. And that is, I mean, that is not pure economic state interest, right? Given constraints and resources, be it money or be it time, it means meeting feminist civil society, you're not meeting a big business or representatives of the private sector. So I would say a beautiful example of how this understanding of prioritizing meeting and interacting with feminist ideas over pure, in the Hobbesian understanding, national interests is the example of when we went with the Minister Heiko Maas in April to Latin America. to Brazil to present the women's rights network that we've been building. He decided to first meet feminist civil society and then day later, Bolsonaro. That for me would be put this understanding of feminist IR into practice.
Yeah, I would like to perhaps follow what you said on feminist foreign policy. That what is, for example, countries with feminist foreign policies are trying to emphasize is that if they try to promote more equality within societies by transforming the structural inequalities, there is more chance that those countries will be more peaceful. And I think this is what Sweden's doing. There's actually this research which I'm not sure if you were referring it, but this is research which shows that the attitude to norms of gender equality, not to sex, but to gender equality within our society shape attitude that underlie a nation's foreign policy. So if we showed that men and women who reject gender equality are much more hostile to other nations and to minorities abroad and in their own country. So I think this is what is kind of the Swedish foreign policy founded on, and explains a little bit what the feminist word in it is. So, and concerning the representation of women in these, for example, our institute is trying quite hard. Always we talk about it that there have to be women. It can be all male panels, but it is sometimes hard because, for example, women. Our institute is also male-dominated, and we have a gender action plan, and it is sometimes difficult to find experts, but sometimes it's also only an excuse because it can be also some type of a laziness to because we know someone and we know how they speak, we know they're not going to mess up when we invite somebody to TV for TV. Talk. We know we have contact on him. We know he's reliable. He because it is normally he. So, for example, give an example that when the Slovakian first female president was elected, there was nobody on Czech TV to comment except men, and they didn't have any data on what it means to have a first female president, and also they invited an expert on etiquette. Who, if you know, I think he shouldn't be on TV anymore because he was basically commenting her clothes and what she should have had hidden. So this is something that somebody like that shouldn't be invited to speak on TV anymore.
Yeah, if I may, just to your question about whether we have enough women or feminists. I will just promote the article in the Czech Journal of International Relations, which was published 2 issues ago. And there is a short article in Czech now on mezinárodní politika. So there is actually quite a good research into the Czech IR and why where have the women gone is the title. Yeah, this one is in English. Yeah, yes. Okay. Yeah, there was a question over there, and then we had Sweden, and then we had Germany. Okay.
First of all, I would like to say thank you very much to Christina and Miller for their contributions this afternoon. I think I'm going to make 2 points, or rather one intervention and one question. And I will contest Miller's point about things to do with feminism being rare things indeed. You could spend, from an activist perspective, you could spend most nights of the week going from one feminist group to another. There is an active in Prague. But my frustration with this is that in going from one group to another, you're likely to get a different definition and a different understanding. There are, in terms of literature, Sheila Jeffreys thinks she's a feminist, and Nancy Fraser thinks she's a feminist, and goodness, Sheryl Sandberg thinks she's a feminist. And I think really what you were talking about, essentialism, is really very important, because if we say that feminism equals women equals peace, then it becomes so reductivist as really to hold back feminism as a transformative movement. And so I'm just questioning at this time how we use the term feminism. Simply by putting feminism in the front of foreign policy, are we actually doing something constructive, transformative? Frequently it has to do with an understanding of patriarchy. How much of, or how do we understand patriarchy, and how do we want to change patriarchy? So that's simply a comment on how the term is used, given the variety of feminisms which are available to us. The point I want to make is, and it is Christina talked about how a feminist foreign policy would tackle right-wing populism. I was just wondering whether you would say a little bit more about that, because I think that there is an element within feminism, feminist politics, since about 2009, 2010, which has become much more fundamentalist in its understanding of what it is to be a woman. And there is an alignment in some cases between right-wing populism and some elements within the feminist movement.
Thank you.
Quick comment on your comment about putting feminism in front of foreign policy. That really goes down to the, I guess, core and most thought about problems within feminism in the space of foreign policy, because rightly so, some would argue doing so, like trying to make security policy and this current security architecture more feminist in itself is you're failing feminism by doing so, because you're bringing a transformative concept in a highly toxic and securitized world. So this in itself shouldn't exist. And I personally and my organization, we have more an approach of trying to change structures from within and outside, and we're getting criticized, we're getting supported by, like, it's civil society is dynamic, right? There are different opinions, and that's good. So that is our approach. But sometimes it comes down to problems like, some would argue, when we talk about, you talked about the Ukraine and how structures there got more militarized, right? Some feminists say we need more women, and feminists both, within security structures and militarized structures, to change them from within. And others say, like, oh, hell no, like this is compromising feminism par excellence. We need to dismantle and destroy those structures first. I err more on the change from within and outside at the same time, but I'm very happy to be challenged, and I'm very happy for others to take a more radical approach, because in the end I think change happens when each player and actor within a movement and within an attempt to change society knows how their place is, or their capacity and skills is best used in this transformative process, and different people have different access. And regarding right-wing populism and right-wing terrorism, you're right what you said about this more essential understanding of women and women working with right-wing structures. So yes, we've seen that not only since Marine Le Pen, and for example in Germany there's I forgot the name of the group, but there's this group, Women for AfD, like our right-wing party, and they've tried to portray their marches as women's marches and co-opted the term like feminist language for their own sake and their own purposes. So that does happen, and not very little. And we have self-proclaimed feminists in Germany who are very complicit in supporting right-wing narrative including brown men raping white women and others like these Oriental and colonized narratives. So that happens, but especially what we see now, and be it Halle, what happened in Germany 2 weeks ago, or like what happens around the world with right-wing terrorism, to really understand what's happening there and how it's attacking feminism and political minorities' rights, we need to look no further than 8chan or other spaces where those right-wing terrorists meet. And I guess many of you have heard of those conspiracy theorists where anti-feminism, Islamophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism, they all come together in this narrative that is so popular amongst right-wing terrorists, that says it's women and feminists. They don't distinguish very well. It's women and feminists who are responsible for declining birth rates because they're demanding the right over their own body, and that leads to more Muslim babies, and the money behind all of that comes from the Jews. And this conspiracy theorist was the basis for what happened in Halle as well, and how the terrorists in Halle got influenced as well. So a feminist agenda in its core is an anti-right-wing terrorism agenda.
Thank you for this tour through the radical discourses, right-wing discourses, and then there was Sweden. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Yes, you've been mentioning most of the things about Sweden already, so I will be brief, but just a comment. The whole thing, of course, started with equality. It's for us. I've been in the ministry since '99, and I honestly don't see that big a change in what we're doing, because we've always been pursuing this foreign policy, but no one was listening, so we had to step up the game. Hence, calling it something that someone actually reacted to, because equality was not cool enough. And then we also, when we do it as a part of a feminist foreign policy. But actually, it all comes down to equality, which we have seen firsthand in Sweden works. As you may have seen was it last week or 2 weeks ago, Sweden was ranked the most equal country in EU. I also believe maybe in the world. We have Canada up there as well, but Iceland, yes. But we have seen that it works on all levels. Economic equality, where the women can go back to work quite early, and the men can be on paternal leave. All these things. The equality on the labor market, all these things work. And we wanted to put that into also the foreign policy. And well, you have mentioned most of it here. I mean, having women at the table when you negotiate peace should be, well, obvious, but obviously it isn't. But it turns out that you get more lasting, sustainable negotiations and peace treaties, or whatever you want to call it, if you have women at the table and if everyone is involved. But it all comes from that. For us, it's pretty normal. I mean, for now it is not like that. We have a female foreign minister and a female foreign trade minister. We have a male minister for development cooperation. But for a while, we had our 9 top people at the ministry were women, and someone pointed that out to me, and I hadn't even thought about it, because no one thinks about that anyway. It's just the way it is. The best persons are there, and if they're men or women, it doesn't matter. So, but you have touched upon most of these things already, but I think it all comes down to that equality scares some old men as well. I mean, as you said, someone will have to personally lose. It is not all win-win in this. It is win-win for society as such, but some older men might have to see their power diminish, or they have to change. But anyway, if there are any more concrete questions, I can also answer. But you have said most of it. Thank you.
We'll actually, like with my organization, we'll have a little trip to visit Anne Berns, that's the coordinator of Feminist Foreign Policy, and the most important offices in December to Stockholm. We are invited by them, so I can't wait to really dive into really each aspect to then bring the knowledge back to the Foreign Ministry in Germany.
Well, thank you for joining us. As there are several embassies around the table, I wanted to ask you for some advice, for some recommendations, what we as embassies can actually do. When I wake up in the morning and walk down to my office, the problem we have is very, very visible, because I always pass the gallery of former ambassadors. And that gallery includes all ambassadors of the Federal Republic of Germany in this country, and there is not one woman. Obviously, I'm happy that this problem will only be solved after me, and I won't resign tonight. But it's obvious. Yesterday evening, for example, we had a dinner that we hosted at our embassy with 15 participants, and yeah, only one of them was female. That's the reason for that was that we invited a group participating in the conference, and they were all men. And then we invited 2 other female participants. So there is a problem. Of course, we tried to do something about the whole issue, but we are just at the beginning. The first thing we all have to do is to care for a respectful language when we deal with each other. That is not discriminating against anyone. We have to take care of our personnel, the personnel that we can choose ourselves to have a fair balance. And actually the personnel we can choose ourselves in the embassy is more female than it is male right now. But that's not true for those people that are sent from Berlin. The situation even got worse in the summer at the German embassy. Of course, family-friendly conditions are important for all of us. And so we try to find some flexible solutions that are beneficial to everyone. One thing I have to say to the Czech Foreign Ministry, that unfortunately things have become worse for young and modern diplomats in this country, as many of them, because of the nature of their job, where they have to attend functions at night, they depend on childcare that they bring from abroad, from non-EU countries. And last summer, unfortunately, the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs has banned taking childcare personnel from non-European countries to the Czech Republic. And that's unfortunately a problem for many single-parent diplomat family, or for families where both parents actually work. And I hope that this can be changed very soon. Of course, another issue is awareness that we have to raise in general. So we are happy to join, for example, the Swedish ambassador when she has this Orange Day action, for example, showing a clear signal against the violence against women. We have to inform about our own initiatives, the ones you mentioned in the Security Council, and that's what we try to do. But in general, I would not agree with you. I think it's not a zero-sum game. It might be at some places, for sure, when it comes to individual careers, that's true. But I think in many other aspects, it's a win-win situation, and all can actually win if we improve the situation. But maybe you have some additional recommendations to us embassies here.
So there's definitely a little bit to learn from Sweden as well, and they've written it down in their nice little handbook as well. But yeah, I have a couple of ideas too. First of all, I guess, and that comes from my limited but experience over the past couple of months in the Foreign Office, and we've been interacting like lots with most embassies in Latin America and Caribbean on founding that network, right? And in the end, if you do not have, as a ministry, which Germany doesn't, if you do not have an institutionalized, top-down, clear statement on we're focusing on feminism and human rights, that it so much depends obviously on individuals, right? We work with one embassy in the Caribbean, and they're not receptive at all to what Latin America department, what we were doing with the Women's Rights Network. Then we're working with a different embassy, and they love it. Like, they put so much resources, time and people and money into supporting the initiative coming from the minister. So that is, I mean, that's nothing you can solve, obviously. And having, I guess, someone like you, as it seems here, who is interested in the topic and excited about it, like, that is hugely important, but it's a problem that it still depends on individuals. So hence why we're pushing so much for Germany also adopting a clear statement or top-down saying that is what we want from all our embassies, because it's unfortunate it still depends on the individual ambassadors in the countries. But having said that, having someone who's interested, I think it is really essential to also bring these discussions that maybe we have here to the embassies and start events as well. And so we've also been asking over the past couple of months feminist activists and human rights defenders at different events. So and also with the Unidas network that we've been building for the minister, we've been asking the feminist activists in Latin America and Caribbean, like, what would you like from the embassies? How can they support you? And they say a couple of things. They say, which might not be as applicable here, maybe, they say they need, as feminist activists in civil society, they would really like direct access to the embassies, with shrinking spaces of civil society around the world and with increasing threat towards human rights defenders, women human rights defenders. Direct line and access for them would be great. A focal person in each embassy who deals with human rights, feminism, whatever you would like to call it, that would be great. Like regular events, like really creating that network and knowing the people in the country an ambassador is serving, who are at the front line of working on human rights. That could really help. And really, as in Argentina, for example, there's this one diplomat I've been working with closely, like, she knew all feminist civil society in the country. So that was not only helpful for the network we were building, but they felt a little bit safer because they knew if something happened to them, they can go to the German embassy. Yeah, it would be maybe those small couple of ideas, but also very happy to sit down more and talk around these things, because there are more knowledgeable people out there who know what they need from embassies in their countries.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Excellency, for this question, because I will try to bake it when it's hot, as we say in Czech, like péct, dokud je to horké, because we are, as the Institute, trying to organize a big conference at the Chernin Palace in March next year, and we are really looking forward to put there as good content as we can, including panels, seminars, and keynote speakers. So if you or Sweden could help us with that, that would be great. Yeah, and then there, gendered foreign relations or gendered international relations. Yeah, I can provide more information on that. Yeah, so there is over there. There is a question, and over there. Then.
Thank you both again for coming to chat with us today. And I'll actually pose my question to the greater room, because it seems that we have a lot of other professionals here. I hear that feminism is a theory designed to ensure socioeconomic and political equality of all sexes. And I'm curious to hear how feminism as a theory that is by definition intended to work at a large scale, how it can accommodate the intersectionality of other people's identities. Because there's, of course, more to an individual than purely their sex. There's, of course, race and class and cultural differences. So I'm curious how that can function both from a foreign policy perspective, and also how it works domestically within a more homogenous society.
Yeah, does. Yeah, okay, there is a mic. Yeah, it was a question to the broader audience. Like, do you want to respond, or let's listen to the next one?
Is it working? Yeah. I would like to ask a question, not necessarily respond. Is that okay?
Yes.
Or actually, I might as well just respond while we're at it.
Yeah.
I personally don't really think. I personally think like I'm more of a person that's attracted towards, or like ideologically attracted towards realpolitik, or realism, and I just don't think that something as big as a feminist international, like feminist foreign policy, would work in such in such kind of different socioeconomic, cultural, classist kind of backgrounds, especially coming from a mixed background. I come from a very European liberal kind of background, and on the other hand, a very Middle Eastern conservative background. So the idea of feminism as kind of intersectional is the word maybe to use here. To me, it wouldn't. I don't think there's a possibility of it to work. But then again, I do have a very pessimistic view of the world, so I don't know. Probably ask someone else about it. But yeah, can I? Yeah, of course.
Sorry. We were talking about cynics before, and it's fair enough. The world is messy and it's difficult. So I guess I understand why some people are cynical and prefer to try to do nothing about changing it. But I guess, and I'd like to quote, I think it was Mandela who said, everything seems impossible until it's getting done. And especially when you say that you don't believe feminism would work, whether be it in foreign policy or anything, then I guess history has already proven you wrong, because it has worked in many, many instances, and some of the results that I mentioned before, they're only some of them. But what you might have been referring to as well, that we might not see a perfectly functioning intersectional feminist foreign policy, and it is difficult to achieve that, like bloody difficult, and it's so many things to think about, like trying to break it down to what it would mean on very tiny specific issues. Then, for example, you land in El Salvador, and what Germany is doing in the bilateral policies with El Salvador, trying to ban the complete ban on abortion, and now getting the intersectional perspective in there. It's not only women who are affected, it's mainly indigenous and poor women. And here you have already intersectional perspective, but that's not already regarding all intersections that people can have, right? So it is so difficult. And rightly so. Sweden, for example, would also get criticized for not recognizing what they've done to their indigenous people in the past. That is intersectionality. It is messy, and striving for something in theory so perfect as intersectional feminist foreign policy that leads to social justice for all people, it can only fail on a daily basis, because we are not perfect, none of us is. But feminism, it's a process. It is not like, okay, let's tomorrow try intersectional feminist foreign policy and then it will work. It's a process, and it is something newish compared to realpolitik and realism. So it needs everyday people and practitioners and thinkers to really think about, what would that mean? Like, am I missing the class aspect here maybe when I'm talking about that? And realizing that, for me personally, like with the things that I'm saying, I might miss like the intersectional perspective on so many issues. And I can only hope that people call it out so I can get better. But it's a process. And if we're not trying, like, we failed already, I guess.
May I just very shortly?
Please.
I don't need the mic maybe. Okay. Okay. No, I just wanted to say, coming from a country where we've been discussing feminism and equality for so long, I would call myself a very liberal feminist. There are different types of feminism, and being liberal, I think it's important not to lose the word feminism to the extreme left wing, because that's not what it is. And some very left wing in Sweden would maybe not call me a feminist, although I am, and some people from Central Europe may call me a radical feminist. I don't know. So it's important to, I mean, feminism is, to a society where it's been around for quite a while and equality is the most important issue. It's not about if you could even be a conservative feminist because it's all about equalities. It's important not to lose the concept of feminism to left or right. You can very well be liberal.
Thank you. And then there is the question over there.
Is it fine if I bring something more into this? Because I think I articulated myself quite badly in the response, and it's not that I don't believe in feminism. See, it would be completely foolish for one to say I do not believe in feminism. Of course, I recognize the fact that, you know, feminism has brought a lot to the table. Say 100 years ago, you know, comparing where we were 100 years ago to where we are now, it's massive. And even comparing it to 100 years before, 200 years ago, it's even more like even more of a bigger difference. In my view, though, like for example, comparing and Ms. Luns, I think you brought this up that, you know, feminist foreign theory in comparison to kind of like realpolitik is very modern. It's a very new thing, right? In comparison to, you know, like realism and, you know, these kind of things. And that's why I personally don't really think, I think it might work in, you know, in a future, but right now in the world we're living in, say, and in the relative soon future, I don't think it would successfully work as we want it to, simply because we live in a very patriarchal society, maybe not so much in the West, but very much so in the Middle East. And see, that's a very important thing and this is a point that I do not know his name, but he brought up. But the world does not revolve around, and you mentioned this, does not revolve around the West merely, but also South America and the Middle East, and that's why it's very difficult to say foreign policy, feminist foreign policy, and apply it to countries like Saudi Arabia, Syria, maybe even I would go as much as saying maybe Poland, you know, especially with the entire rise of, you know, the abortion laws and things like that. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Briefly, sorry. I think we agree on that it's bloody difficult. But the question then that follows is, so do we not even try, or will we try? And mentioning things like Syria, in the north of Syria, we had seen a small statish project coming up infused by feminist ideals that is currently under threat, for example. So I think we have the same analysis of the situation. The question is only, do we try or do we not, because it's so difficult?
Yeah, over there.
I'll use this. Yeah. I want to pick up our colleague's point about intersectionality. As a trans woman, I face transphobia every day, which is invisible to the people who are not trans. Angela Davis wrote her book, Women, Race and Class, in 1980, and the audience was aimed at white women feminists, because the presumption was that she felt that that black women had been disowned, as it were, or marginalized within feminism. And so intersectionality implies that somebody has to lose out. Somebody has to give something has to give up. And our colleague, I believe was German, I'm not sure what his status is, but our colleague there was talking about the social reproduction in which the diplomats are bringing, I presume, people from outside the EU for their childcare. And so intersectionality would mean that our colleagues would have to lose out. They would have to realize that there is a class structure here, and that class structure is not simply gendered, but it's also racialized as well. So intersectionality would mean a feminist foreign policy which was intersectional would have to realize that some women would have to lose out. And so I think it's an interesting proposition. But to be frank, over many years, it's always the intersectionality is always given as the answer, but I've never actually seen it as the solution.
Yes.
Okay. I have a comment on the, let's say, practical political aspects and also on the public debate regarding these issues. I think the main mistake is the essentialism that was already mentioned, but it doesn't have to be necessarily only gender or feminist essentialism. It's the all essentialisms that happen. I think you also made such mistake when you tried to define feminism at the beginning because you talked about sex. But you have gender, you have race, you have class, and then I go to the practical example of the Swedish foreign policy, and we could hear what happened when they declared feminist foreign policy. In the very first sentence of the declaration, women and children were mentioned. So what the mistake that happens always when you take an idea, let's say a general idea or an academic idea, and you take it and try to implement in practical politics by focusing on something and prioritizing something. But I think this is a mistake, because when you tell the men or whoever else or the white people or anyone else that now we are going to focus on women and children and especially these or those, then they feel threatened, or they actually feel they are losing the power and there's a backlash. So I think if you talk about the security of the individuals, human security, human rights, and you claim that individuals are now important, then those countries and cultures that would prefer the sovereignty of the states or the collective rights, they again feel threatened. So I think making these priorities, although it's to a certain extent necessary, is a mistake, because you face the backlash when you always choose this is going to be individuals, this is going to be women, etc., etc. And yeah, so, and I think there was this important comment on the win-win situation. If we want to make things better, and if the people or the countries who want to run a feminist foreign policy want to succeed, they have to also explain actually to those who are then left out, like the men or like the wealthy or the powerful, what will be positive for them in the end. That was the question, what's the win-win, right? Because if you look at the declaration, a feminist foreign policy declaration, it in detail will explain what is going to be done for women, children, for the weak, for the poor, etc. But you also have to convince the others. So you also have to come with innovative ideas how, even in the long run, this will somehow benefit those who are left out in that respect. So, and this is very hard, of course, but you have to convince them. So yeah, that's my point of view. I was also surprised when I saw this feminist foreign policy in the Swedish case at the beginning. I was really surprised that it suddenly mentions women and children in the very first sentence, because there are also men, or it doesn't matter, animals, other people who feel threatened or who are afraid, and suddenly they read the first sentence and they feel, okay, now we are left out. So I would rather speak about maybe the values, ideas, values, or ways of doing things than prioritizing individuals, things, or yeah, maybe kind of messy comment, but.
Thank you for the comment, and I will spin it into a question. is it even possible to persuade them, those powerful and wealthy, to just give up part of their power and wealth? Or do we need to grab it, take it, fight for it?
I guess I think the tendency amongst people is more on the side of not giving up their own privilege for all people. We definitely have. We can achieve through activism. We can achieve to get it to a certain extent and to keep making convincing argument of why we should do so. And when I say that, I don't mean those arguments around more women mean higher GDP or more women mean this and this. I don't mean those utilitarian arguments, but again, human rights-based arguments. There's a human rights charter, and those rights should be equal to everyone. And basing an activist approach on this assumption should get us somewhere, because it is not as easy as that. Organizations like my own one, but many others, feminist civil society organizations, are looking into finding the best advocacy strategies to get there. And it looks very different for different contexts and for different areas. We're currently doing, again, advocacy regarding a new resolution in the Security Council. And that to do something like that, it needs an understanding of where people are sitting with which kind of influence and where you have access to and what kind of messaging for different groups of people. It is activism and advocacy work is really complicated. But I think it's the most promising approach to get us to transformation. Yeah.
Yeah, I have actually two questions. One regarding the impact of feminism at the national level and the other one at the international level. So at the national level, yeah, is it true that feminism has had a big impact? And a lot of other countries still need a lot of work. Also Morocco, because I'm from Morocco and I've seen a lot of different things than in Czech Republic. And for me, Czech Republic is better. And then if I go to another country is better. But I do recognize that there are a couple of countries who already achieved a very good level of equality. And it is actually going to the other side, to the other extreme, a positive discrimination. I mean, positive, not a good one, but a discrimination against male, judicial one, for example. And to illustrate, if a woman hit a man, does the man go to the police? I don't think so, but if a man just slap a woman, it would be an issue. And I have a lot of other examples of some friends in UK having this judicial discrimination. Maybe can we adopt regulation to stop this repercussion of the radical feminism? Because after all, it's about equality, it's not about any discrimination. And the other example is regarding the international relation. And I just want to know how is, first of all, a lot of people assume that feminism is a theory, but I'm still confused. I still want to know your approach. Is it a substantial theory or just a theoretical approach? I mean by substantial theory, does it have a particular actor? Does it study particular relations? Does it focus on a particular level, or it is flexible on this sense? Is it just a sub-theory that takes approaches and ideas from a lot of other theories, which is going in a good flow with the human rights and so on, or on liberalism, or it is added in a new thing to the field? That's all, thank you.
There was a lot in there, what you were saying. Let me try to get it all together. So you were mentioning kind of this positive discrimination, and I felt, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were trying to talk about like reverse sexism. and there is no such thing as reverse sexism, as there is no such thing as reverse racism, because, and I'm saying this based on an understanding that sexism or racism, they're both, and many other forms of systematic oppression and discrimination, they are systems. They come with an oppression of certain gender or race or religion, ethnicity, sexual identity, in a whole system, and it encompasses all areas of life. So I find the example you were mentioning about a female friend hitting a male friend or something completely out of balance and out of context, because it lacks the understanding that we live in a society where in Germany it's more likely for a girl to experience sexualized violence than going to university. Every 1 in 3 women experiences male violence, and the majority is experiencing sexualized harassment. So having and the majority of poor people are women, and then like all, it's systematic. It reaches, this form of oppression reaches in every sector in society. It's the same for ethnicities and religions, and so having this understanding and a historical understanding of where it's coming from, it is, I think it's very wrong to say that we can equal it with, or put it on the same level with a man being slapped by a woman, because this is nothing systematic, and we do not live in a society that systematically violates men. It is of course unfortunate, and there should always be laws to protect anyone from any form of physical violence. I just think it's not fair to say that we can compare it. But for example, I mentioned before I was involved in activism to change the German law on sexualized violence, to make it consent-based. And then people, and it was really heated debate in like top newspaper and magazines in Germany. We were really bringing it to the forefront and top level. And those arguing against changing that law, I guess when now most people look back, they were like, what the hell, Germany, 2016, your rape law was not consent-based? Back then, there were still so many people, like editors-in-chief, arguing against it, exactly falling, I think, into the trap of putting those experiences on the same level when they were saying, but wait, isn't it if we change the German rape law, wouldn't like all these women now accuse men of falsely raping them? And putting something, a very unequal situation, on equal footing, when, again, this lacks a systematic understanding, because in Germany until today, less than 1% of rapists get convicted. So it's, if we lose perspective of everything that's happening on a systematic level, that leads to such comparisons. So I then pose these people the question, so what do you want to focus on the fact that 1 in 3 women is affected by male violence, or that amongst the 1% of rape, or that we have this tiny little below 5% rate of false convictions? Like, what is your priority? So I would not put this on equal level, never, because that is ahistorical and a systematic against a systematic understanding. But as you said, the final outcome should always be that everyone is protected against any form of physical violence, for example. Yeah.
For the theoretical part, is it more substantial theory which is focused on one actor, one level, one type of relations, or it is more just an approach of theories, or just a sub-theory which is taking approaches from different other theories and collecting them because they are more liberal, more favoring in human rights and so on? Just want to know your perspective. Is it hard theory or just substantial?
Yeah, before Christina answers, just think about one last question. Just one last question, because we are out of time and we have to finish up. So yeah, think about it, make an agreement. Yeah, and so then we will leave the reply. What do you think? Will you reply first?
I spoke so much, I'm happy for you to respond.
Yeah, okay, so there is the answer.
Okay, no, it's just like something that I wanted to reply to what Iman said, that because maybe sometimes it's not been made clear enough, is that the fact that a man that cannot go to the police and denounce a woman is not a product of radical feminism, it's just a product of the patriarchy, because like men should be strong and they are not allowed to be weaker than women. So that's the point. Like radical feminism as positive discrimination, it doesn't exist. That's just like if a woman says, oh, a man cannot complain if it's hit by a woman, that's not feminism, because feminism is just about equality. That's patriarchy in its purest form, I would say. That's it. Oh, maybe.
Is it an urgent question? Is it burning? Okay. Okay. So, thank you very much to all of you for coming here, asking the question and discussing. Thank you, Christina, for your exploration of feminist foreign policy. And thank you, Mila, for your exploration of the academic critique of feminist foreign policy. And thanks to Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung. Is it the right one? Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung for the green one. Thank you for helping to put this together. Thank you and have a nice day, and come to next events of the IIR and the green one.